and I just want to set the scene as to where Saikei fits into the various Japanese arts. Starting off, Saikei is not bonsai. Okay, it's a very different philosophy. So, starting off with some of the Japanese arts that they do outside of the martial arts. I'm going to start off with ones that don't have a pot, don't have plants, don't have sand, and that's about it. And that is suiseki. So suiseki is basically contemplating a stone. So you might ask me, well, how can I contemplate a stone? Well, this is suiseki. Normally has what they call a daiser, and it shouldn't actually be connected to the stone itself. And you put it down like that and you display it. And normally it's got to do with proportion and size. I always used to, when I was working, I always had one of these in my office, just to get my brain out of where I'm trapped and to escape into freedom. So you can place this wherever you want to, and it can be what you want it to be. It can be one of those islands that they show in the James Bond movies, or it could be a ship sailing in an ocean. Then here's another one. See how thin the thing is. But so now you could say, all right, that's an island. Now when you're looking at proportion, you can say, okay, fine, that might work that way, it might work that way. This is sort of counterbalance. This is more maybe ships in the wind. Or for proportion, you could say, well, that changes the whole look of it. And you can play around with it and do what you want to. But you can meditate using these. So these ones have got what they call a daiser. And the daiser is basically the base. This is a grotto or a cave. It reminds me of the hole in the wall at the Transkei. And also, I just basically cut a piece out of some hardboard and made that. So you can have that, but then I also had this one. Unfortunately, my waterfall broke off. This is all natural. Pelindaba rock. This is dolomite. But the bottom of my waterfall broke off. But there's a cave there. There's a waterfall there. I can escape just by looking at this. With no vegetation, no bonsai that I've slaved over, no trying to keep the thing alive in a hothouse over winter. And these are all ones with daisers. And I actually managed to pick this one up, which has its own natural daiser on the rock itself. Okay, let's get back to Saikei. So Saikei is part of these classifications of Japanese art. Get my glasses on again. So ones with no vegetation would be the suiseki. Then there's another one called bonsai, which is a pot, sand, and stone, but no vegetation. They normally portray simple landscapes. Also, you know, those Zen trays that you get and people try and get out there, that's what this is. So that's bonsai. Then you get bonkai, which also has no vegetation, but there are people inside the bonsai. So it has little figurines. So that's also a difference. Also, the difference between painting and bonsai is painting often display with figurines. Bonsai, you don't. Bonsai, you try to leave it open to the imagination. Then you get ones that have no pot. So what would that be? the Tsukiyama, which is actually means Tsukiyama means a hill and a pond. So some people experiment with water, with their landscapes. And we can get all technical and all intellectual about all of this and put it into brackets or into little positions of what it all is. Saikei is a pot, sandstone with vegetation. Often people look at definitions between bonsai. What's the difference between bonsai and Saikei? People say, oh, well, bonsai takes years and years to work on this one subject, whereas Saikei, you can actually do it within a few hours or even a half an hour. And you can make it look old with young trees because you're creating a landscape with vegetation and all sorts of other things thrown in. So that's basically just to position where Saikei fits into this whole thing. Okay, so it's a Japanese art form, miniature gardening, and it extends the principles of bonsai to create a living miniature landscape within a single container. So these also have single containers. A slate is also a container. Okay, and it involves arranging rocks, soil, and sometimes water. People create Saikei with a little fish pond pumping water with a little waterfall going down. That's acceptable as Saikei. And then with related vegetation, small trees, etc., to evoke a natural scene. Unlike bonsai, which focuses on an individual tree, Saikei emphasizes the overall composition of the entire scene. So when you're looking at this, you're seeing an overall scene. And to you, that's beautiful. A bonsai practitioner will start looking at this and saying, wow, it took me ages to actually make this. But when you look at this, you don't first see the tree. Whereas when you look at bonsai, you should first see the tree. You should not even, the pot shouldn't even detract from the tree. The tree is the focus. Here, the tree is not the focus. It's one of the main characters in this whole composition. But when you look at it, you look at the balance, you look at the whole thing. So that's a perfect Saikei, but bonsai as well. The other reason you can classify this as bonsai is it's only got moss and it doesn't have other vegetative matter. Then, what is Saikei? It's natural. Also, beyond bonsai, it's not just the tree, it's the overall landscape with various plant types mixed with rock formations. Now, we learned previously in our previous meetings that when you are dealing with rocks, always try to use the same type, always make them flow into the same direction, always make sure that your balance, your proportion, etc. is correct. Otherwise, it's not going to look natural. Saikei is a living landscape, so the trees and plants are real. And, it's not something to be exhibited in a shopping center or whatever. As a bonsai practitioner, you know how long it takes you to look after your trees, etc. Well, a Saikei is the same because you're dealing with living material. It's also, the emphasis in Saikei is on composition. You saw the positions that I put those rocks in. Saikei is also the same. It's very, very important that you get your proportion right. You'll see the difference between a good Saikei and a mediocre Saikei is definitely has got to do with composition and proportion. And it doesn't use a single species, but basically with traditional bonsai, there's a single focus, and that's the tree. With Saikei, it's the whole landscape. It's everything. The composition in bonsai is the tree in relation to the open air around it, but also in relation to the size and shape of the pot. Whereas Saikei is a whole landscape with multiple living organisms, and it's a three-dimensional landscape. It's not just two-dimensional. So the same way when you're busy pruning your tree, often you look at it and you try and design your tree, always look at it from the top, and we're very conscious of making sure that the light gets onto the correct branches and that the one branch doesn't cover the other branch. You do the same with the Saikei. So when you're creating a Saikei, you'll go over the top and have a look from the top. Is this a pleasing composition from the top as well? Because it needs to be. Then Saikei, mandatory elements. You have to have stone in a Saikei. There are some people who say a bonsai tree with some gravel is Saikei because the gravel is a rock. You could take that as being a Saikei as well, because a grain of sand is also a rock. So that's why you can say bonsai is a Saikei, but technically a Saikei must always have a rock, and they work and they serve as mountains or cliffs, riverbank or whatever, and they're integrated with soil to create a whole topography around, like you as a little child with a mud tray, you're creating a little landscape there. That's what you're doing in that. The container for the bonsai is usually a pot chosen to complement the tree, but within Saikei, your contours, your ground landscape is crucial. The shape of what you're doing is crucial, and it must never look man-made. And then, to me, the most important part of this whole story is scale, tree size, harmony, balance. And if you can get that right, the more realistic it will look. And then bonsai takes ages and ages and ages to grow that tree into where you're wanting it to go. Saikei is usually very quick. And you use young trees, you can create a beautiful Saikei with young trees, etc. at a bonsai demo, walk away, and it's done. You can then use that as an exhibit, or you could then nurture that over years into an older Saikei. These go totally against what I've just said. So you can't just go and say, yeah, Saikei is quick, bonsai is not. Saikei can also take a long time. Vegetation, generally, bonsai, it's the tree, moss, and maybe one or two little bits of grass or something if you want to put that in, but that's it. You don't over embellish. Whereas the Saikei, it's mixed vegetation. It's grasses, small flowering plants, lichen, mosses, etc. So it's a varied image of nature. It's not just the tree and the pot. Where bonsai wants you to focus on the tree because that person spent his lifetime blood, sweat and tears to try and get that tree to where it is, the Saikei practitioners taken hardly any time to create it. Kawamoto, Kawamoto actually made Saikei popular again. He started in he was born in 1917, but in the 60s and the 70s, he started making Saikei popular. Saikei literally means a planted landscape, and it's a relatively modern offshoot of an early Japanese tradition of making copies of nature and to bring gardens inside. The Japanese live in a very high density area, and to bring nature into their apartments and their flats and things, they make little scenes to escape where they are. So that's also how bonsai started. So Saikei was originally practiced by the ruling as well as the scholarly and religious classes to bring back memories of their travels through the countryside, etc. So here you can see, and there were even rules that the elite were allowed to play with this kind of thing, but the peasants weren't allowed to actually practice this. And then Kawamoto started post-war Saikei again. He made it popular because of the war. There was a lot of hardship. People couldn't go outside, and and the little pleasures in life weren't accessible. So he brought back the whole history of Saikei, which the imperialists in the palaces were practicing from the 1200s and the 1100s. He brought that back into the 60s and the 70s. This isn't him. This is a guy called Frank Moyer. He's from California. He's a modern day Saikei practitioner. But Kawamoto sought to democratize art and not make it only for the enlightened few. So he devised Saikei as a simpler, more accessible form of bonsai, bonsai display that could provide many of the same aesthetic and contemplative pleasures without the decades of cultivation. So these people were locked up indoors in a war area, and they were trying to escape to a natural area. So they create a little place where their mind could contemplate and they could free their mind from being trapped in the war situation. So is this Saikei, or is it creating mini landscapes? Is it? I think it is. Saikei is not an elitist thing. It's whatever makes you happy. Put it in the ground. You could be sitting on the beach. You could be creating a Saikei here, quickly go for a swim and wipe it out. You've had that little artistic pleasure, and Saikei has brought you some kind of pleasure. Look at the growth habits of your plants that you're going to be choosing if you're making your Saikei. So you're not going to build something to die. You're going to make something to live. Think about foliage. Don't put big leaves into something that's out of proportion. Adapt that to its environment, to the place that it's going to be standing in your garden, and try to use native species local to the area. Form of balance and scale. That's why I put those little balance rocks there, because it's balance. But yeah, balance is very, very important within bonsai, Saikei, and all of that. What about our heritage? This guy, I think he's Canadian. I quite enjoy him, old Nigel. What I like about Nigel is he enjoys his bonsai. He can get trapped into a little tree for ages, 3 hours. You can watch him on YouTube, busy with a little tree doing something that you've already got. But because it's African, he doesn't have it, so he freaks out about it. But let's move away from the international bonsai scene, the international Saikei scene. Let's create and start new standards, because we've got such wonderful opportunities to do that. I would rather have try to focus on making something like that without any man-made objects. And also and I'll finish with this, let's make it our own, let's embrace it, and create what we see out there in the veld.